How long can a nation survive on pretense? How far can people drift when they confuse ritual with reality? We often imagine the moments of divine intervention as spectacles of fire and wind. But history's greatest shifts rarely begin with a roar. They begin with a whisper of uncomfortable truth. The time we are speaking of was a season of deep spiritual slumber. Jerusalem was rebuilt proud, yet profoundly empty. They were performing their religion perfectly, but their soul was withering. When heaven finally chose to break the escalating silence, it didn't send a dazzling celebrity or a man carrying scrolls of immediate comfort. It sent the opposite. A man with no credentials, no lineage of distinction, just an unsettling fire in his bones. He came not with trumpets, not with scrolls, not with miracles. No thunder rolled when he walked. No fire fell when he spoke. Yet heaven had sent him. Not to entertain, but to wound the silence with a truth no one asked for, and certainly no one wanted. His name was Malachi, meaning my messenger. But he wasn't the kind of messenger that brought blessings and ease. What he carried was far more dangerous clarity. And clarity has always been the ultimate threat to systems built on empty performance. He was the final voice, the last call before the door of prophecy closed for 4 long, deafening centuries. Jerusalem stood tall, rebuilt, and deeply proud. The stones of the temple shone with the fresh polish of national identity. It was proof they had survived the exile. The system was back in place. Sacrifices had resumed. Festivals were celebrated on schedule. From the outside, the religious machinery was running flawlessly. But Malachi walked through a city where the central truth was deafening. God had left the building. Worship hadn't stopped, but wonder had. They had perfected religious performance but lost the fire of reverence. The songs were still sung, but they no longer carried the weight of trembling awe. The altar still burned, but the fire was hollow. It was merely fire management, a routine chore, not a sacred connection. This was the era that perfected religious optics, while completely neglecting the core. They still called him Lord, but only with their lips. Religion had become the national performance, and inside that performance, justice was for sale. Marriage vows were disposable, and spiritual life was mechanical. We have to ask ourselves, are we performing rituals that lost their purpose centuries ago? Is our dedication about appearance, or is it about the presence? Malachi knew the fracture always begins at Tiata. He didn't start his critique with the common people. He started with the clergy, the supposed guardians of the covenant. The priests were moving like actors dressed in garments they no longer respected. They could recite the law flawlessly, but their hearts remained untouched, cold, and calculated. When they approached the altar, they weren't offering their best, they were offering their leftovers. They brought diseased, blind, limping animals for sacrifice. Malachi pulled no punches. "You would not offer that to your governor," he declared. "Why offer it to God?" This was more than just poor quality control. It was an act of profound disrespect that revealed a transactional view of the divine. To them, God was a distant recipient who could be tricked by good optics and cheap offerings. This hypocrisy was further magnified in the marketplace. Malachi confronted the people, raising his voice like thunder. "Will a man rob God? Yet you rob him in your offerings, in your tenor, in your leftovers. You bring him the last and expect him to bless the first." His message forced a crucial, uncomfortable question. If the one leading the ritual does not respect the sacred, how can the people be expected to revere it? The prophet's scrutiny did not halt at the temple gates, the market stalls, or the corrupt courts. He turned his searing gaze to the most ordinary, yet most sacred space, the marital home. Malachi exposed a betrayal far more insidious and corrosive than spoiled sacrifices or meager tithes. The priests may have polluted the altar with diseased animals, but the men of Israel were polluting the very foundation of the community with broken vows. Malachi turned to the husbands who had discarded their wives, the wives of their youth like broken pottery tossed into the alley. This was not simply a lament over infidelity or moral failing. Malachi elevated the issue to covenant treason. He painted a picture the men were seeking radiant, intoxicating smiles of foreign women, trading a solemn, sacred vow for fleeting convenience and cheap pleasure. He saw the discarded wives, the silent partners of their meager beginnings, standing in the shadow of an old olive tree, their faces etched with the deep sorrow of betrayal, tears pooling in the wake of abandonment. He confronted the man in fine robes not with a legal citation, but with a deeply personal, heartbreaking question. Is this how you repay the covenant of your youth? Did she not walk beside you when your hands were empty, when you were struggling to become someone? Did she not believe in you when you were no one? And now that your prosperity has arrived, you forget the vow made before the Lord. The man, relying on the shallow self-justification of the age, scoffed, offering the timeless excuse of a numb heart. The heart wants what it wants. But Malachi's response froze the air, cutting straight to the core of their spiritual error. And the Lord sees what the heart hides. The Lord was a witness between you and the woman you have cast aside. He does not forget. This confrontation revealed a devastating and timeless truth. True spiritual fidelity is first tested not in the sanctuary, but in the stability and sanctity of your most intimate relationships. When we fail the human covenant we make before God, we are simultaneously failing the divine one. The holiness we seek in the temple is rendered meaningless by the betrayal we commit in the home. The spiritual stupor of the nation reached its peak when they started demanding answers while simultaneously living in defiance. Where is the God of justice? They sneered, mistaking God's silence for impotence, treating the long stretch of mercy as evidence of his absence. Their continued prosperity, the bustling market stalls, the abundant harvests, the clinking of gold was interpreted not as a gift of grace, but as definitive proof that their cheap mechanical religion was more than enough. They mistook patience for approval. They laughed at the warnings, their smugness a thick layer of insulation against truth. But Malachi's gaze was not impressed by their material success. He looked beyond the surface-level stability and saw the fragile foundation of their pretense. He issued the solemn, unavoidable verdict. Because his patience is not approval, because mercy is not absence, the fire is still waiting. He declared that judgment delayed is emphatically not judgment denied. It is merely grace extended. To underscore the terrifying reality of this looming consequence, the prophet received a vision, not a gentle whisper, but a divine decree drawn not in dust, but in eternity. He saw the scroll, the final warning. The day is coming, burning like a furnace, and all the arrogant, all who do evil, will be like straw. This wasn't just a threat to be dismissed. It was a clear articulation that the boundary had been drawn not around the physical walls of the temple, but inside the very soul of the nation. It was a line separating the performed from the surrendered. For every generation that substitutes sincerity with spectacle and relies on their own performance while scoffing at truth, this warning stands eternal. When God holds back his hand, it is a period of open grace, a precious finite window for repentance. But that window will close, and when it does, the fire will fall, consuming all the hollow rituals and cheap offerings. For God's ultimate commitment is not to their comfort, but to his own uncompromising justice, and amidst the corruption and the mechanical religious noise, the narrative takes a vital turn toward hope. Malachi's vision was not solely of fire and ash. He saw something else, something hidden scattered across the city, were a few who still feared his name. They didn't stand out. They weren't the temple celebrities or the wealthy merchants. They made no noise. They simply knelt, in secret, wept in private, and gave when no one saw. They understood that the power of devotion lies not in public applause, but in private surrender. They were the faithful few, the remnant who still trembled when they heard the sacred name, who still believed that the silence of God did not mean the absence of God. And the prophet saw the Lord nod, not with wrath, but with tenderness. For God never forgets those who remember him, and he was writing their names in a special place, a book of remembrance. This provides a timeless, powerful comfort, even when an entire system is collapsing into pretense. True faith is always recognized and recorded by the divine, no matter how quiet or hidden the act of devotion may be. The scroll of Malachi, the final word of the era, did not end in terror. After the severe warning about the coming fire, the voice softened, delivering the ultimate promise, a line drawn in hope, not in judgment. To those who fear his name, the vision said, "The Sun of Righteousness will rise with healing in its wings." This was the ultimate value add for the faithful remnant, the promise of restoration following the necessary confrontation. The prophet wasn't sent just to condemn hollow performance. He was sent to point toward a future where true reverence would be rewarded. This sun would not just scorch the wicked. It would bring healing justice and light to the obscured few who had held fast to their vows in secret. Malachi understood that God never intends to finish with destruction. The fire only comes to consume the false, so that the genuine can be revealed. The message remains powerful for us today. Our current struggles, our long periods of waiting are not signs of abandonment, but anticipation. Anticipation for the rising of that ultimate source of healing and clarity. By the time Malachi finished writing the last letter on his parchment, he walked quietly out of the temple for the last time. No one noticed, but heaven did, because the stage was being set for 4 centuries of silence. This silence wasn't abandonment. It was a profound anticipation. God chose to withdraw the immediate prophetic voice to allow the nation's pretense to fully mature and to let the impact of Malachi's final words settle. The system lacking divine correction would collapse inward. The purpose of this long quiet was to make the next voice unmistakable. Centuries later, that silence was finally broken. The next voice wouldn't come from a palace or a priestly line, but would cry out from the wilderness. It was a man with wild eyes, John the Baptist preaching repentance by the Jordan River. And those who truly heard him recognized the echo, the same line from the same scroll, the voice of one crying in the wilderness preparing the way. This proved that God never truly ends with silence. He ends with a whisper that becomes a roar. The Word would finally walk among them not as scroll, but as man, as the promised Son of Righteousness. He would finish what Malachi began, shattering the illusion of performance and demanding surrender. Perhaps this ancient voice still echoes for you today. If you've offered hollow sacrifices or lost the fire of reverence, understand that the scroll has spoken. The silence has passed, and the word still lives, calling you back from ritual to relationship.